Hello everyone and welcome to the third and final video of this special video series where we are going to go over on how to create an environment in Unreal Engine 5. For the people that have not watched my previous two videos, I do recommend that you watch them, but basically this video series has been sponsored by MSI. They were kind enough to send me their Creator Z16P laptop and they told me that I can do whatever testing I want on it and give my honest opinion on it. And that is what we are currently doing. We are currently creating a very heavy to render environment in Unreal Engine 5, and at the end of this video I will give you my honest opinion on the laptop. So let's go ahead and get this video started.
Okay, so in this final video we will finish off our environment. This includes placing some smaller assets, polishing up the already existing assets, doing our lighting and post effects, and creating final portfolio screenshots. Okay, so let's go ahead and continue. So what we're going to do in this chapter is mostly polish. So it's going to be adding our extra small details to our environment, like over here our antennas and our satellites. And then of course also playing around a little bit more with our lighting and color grading and all that kind of stuff, just to really make the final screenshot. So I have a few things. I have some antennas, I have some satellites, and I have some roof assets. I'm going to work from large to small. So right now I'm working mostly on like the antennas and the satellite dishes and stuff like that. These are actually really nice because before this, our buildings, we basically just have like a bunch of square shapes. However, with this, we can very quickly make these shapes feel a little bit more organic because we all of a sudden change our silhouette to also have these spikes sticking out of it. And for this environment, especially as a sci-fi environment, it works really well. Now I'm just placing these very quickly. However, you can of course spend your time and really place them in a logical way where the satellites would be, where the dishes would be, and also which direction your satellite dishes would point at, because often they would all point at like a specific direction. So that's another small detail that you can do. But personally, I'm doing this quite random. Now, at the very end of this video, you will actually also see the environment that I have completely completed, but that I've completed in a way that it is not being done on camera. So with that, what I mean is that I really took my time, and that environment actually took me way longer. It took me like double the time or triple the time just in Unreal to actually complete it. But I do want to show you that. So you will go ahead and you will see that at the very end of this video. And also, of course, you will see the final review of how I found this laptop at the end of the video. So at this point, this is not going to be very interesting. It is just placing all of these satellite dishes. So what I will do is I will just go ahead and kick in the hyperspeed, where I will increase the time lapse even more for these satellite dishes. But once again, work from large to small. We are starting with the satellite dishes and then we are gonna go ahead and go over to our roof assets. Here we go. So now the speed is almost double. So now hopefully we can get through this quite quickly, because it's just really time consuming. Adding small details to an environment is often the most time consuming. But yeah, it's like the finishing touch. I personally really like doing it because you will really see your environment come together quite quickly. But of course, for recording a video, it will be quite time consuming. But over here you can see me still going back to my main cameras. And this is mostly for all of my satellite dishes and for my antennas, that I like to have a good look at my main cameras. Also, right now everything is still white. This is because these assets, they are not actually textured. So what I'm actually going to do as like a quick little trick is later on, I'm just going to select all of these small assets and I'm going to throw on a special material like you can see over here on those two assets. So it's just going to be a very basic material that is just like a metal. Now the cool thing that I did with this metal, which you can also do, is that it doesn't have any UVs. A lot of the assets in this environment, they actually do not have any UVs. They use world space UV, or often it is called triplanar mapping. And this is something that is very easy to do inside of Unreal Engine. If you are creating a shader, it is called a node that is called world aligned UV. And that node basically allows you to have your models here without any UVs. And then if you just throw in, for example, a tileable metal material, you can very quickly create these kind of assets. So that's the reason I'm telling you this, is because you can very quickly do the concepting. Even for these buildings, all of the metal that you see in here, they are not actually UVs. They are just world spaced. They are world space UVs. It can get quite confusing quite quickly. but it just basically means that no matter where I place it, I don't need to go through the process of UV unwrapping. And this once again saves a lot of time. So this is something that you can also have a look at. If you know that your camera will not get very close, or if you know that it is something very specific like these sci-fi buildings, you can often get away with that compared to creating entire unique UVs or even just creating UVs for tileable meshes. And that's another thing, almost none of these models have an actual unique texture. This is something that if you are a student, a lot of students seem to think that you need to create unique textures for every single thing. But that's not the case. This environment is 95% just completely tileable materials. And you can see that even so, with the correct lighting and with the correct setup, it will look very convincing. Now, of course, if you really are going to zoom in and everything, then it will not be as perfect. But you always need to have a quick look at your time. Because, of course, if the difference between getting a really cool looking screenshot and you just need something to look cool, and having a perfect environment that you completely textured in every single detail, if that difference is literally 5 or 6 times as long in terms of how much time you need to spend on it, then of course you can just think by yourself, okay, do I really need to have perfect unique UVs? Maybe if it's like a smaller environment for a portfolio piece, this is totally fine. But if, for example, the environment is about showcasing how to, well, use Unreal in this case, but also showcasing how to do level art and how to do lighting, then it is simply not always needed. So for you, it's something that you will learn throughout your experience to kind of like figure out what would be the best methods to use within the time that you have. And now at this point, we are pretty much done with the placement of our assets. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go ahead and look for my camera angles and sometimes still place an asset where I feel that there's too much empty space. And then what I will do is, as I said before, I'm going to select all of my assets in my world outliner and I'm going to apply a simple metal to it, as you can see over here. And then after that I will just do like some manual placement also with my metal, but this is something that I will not focus too much on right now. So here you can see that I on purpose just threw metal on everything, just so that it works. And then I have a few different metal materials. So I also have one that is a little bit more plain, as you can see over here. So the nice thing is that you can kind of like switch around with those two. If you feel like one of your antennas is not visible enough, you can always make it a lighter color. So I recommend always just have like a few different types of metal in your environment and then just playing around with it and just seeing whatever works best. Now at this point we have our dome. So our dome is basically just storytelling. The dome is here because else it would not be logical for all of these plants to grow here because it is a desert. So that's why we placed it here. You can see it is like the dome has been placed by humans and it just provides oxygen and within it just with like, I don't know, generators, something like it's sci-fi. So it just has like a bunch of oxygen and it just allows for the trees to grow and everything. Now I am going to make my dome a lot bigger than would normally be needed. This is because I do not want to have my sky filled with these really small shapes. So simply by scaling it up, the shapes will be a little bit bigger. And also you can see that it has like some glass in it, which is nicely reflective. Now what I'm going to do is I'm really gonna work on the finer details. For example, over here you can see me manually placing a tree because I felt like I wanted to have a tree just sitting like in the edge because else this building feels too flat. And because it is so close to the camera, it is just nice to have something there so that it feels less flat, see? So that actually adds quite a bit to our scene again. It's something that you will play a lot with having a foreground object, a midground object and a far distant object. It's quite a classic technique to just get like something quite interesting. And what I see right here, I quite like. So you can see me just using like my 2 viewports. Now at this point my laptop is going to run a little bit slower, not too much, like 10 FPS slower, because it needs to render 2 viewports at the same time. But honestly, so far it's holding up really well. I'm seriously impressed, especially as someone who is only used to using desktop PCs. I'm really impressed by it. But anyway, you will hear my full thoughts in just a sec. So over here, I'm now just playing around with a bunch of different things. I'm just kind of like jumping back and forth from asset placement to lighting right now. And here with my lighting, there are always a few settings that I like to use. So I'm still just like placing few of these buildings because I didn't really like the camera angle of it. But then we are going to focus on our lighting. And for your lighting, Your main focus in exterior environments is often the skylight, it is your direction light, which often is your sun, and it is your post effects and then your fog, which we also have. So, and what I'm mostly going to focus on right now is color grading. Color grading is really powerful inside of Unreal. What we can do with color grading is we can literally take a screenshot of our environment, go into Photoshop and change the colors how we want. For example, adding more contrast. For example, just like changing the general colors, changing the shadow colors. And then we actually have a method of translating this back into Unreal Engine. This method is called LUTs. So color lookup table. If you enter that in Google, you can go ahead and you can find it out. Or you can check on my YouTube channel, Fast Track Tutorials. And in there, you will also be able to find a video on how to use LUTs. So that's what I'm doing here. I took a screenshot. And now I'm just basically adding my LUT, which is this little bar that can basically control your colors. And now what I'm doing is I'm just going to go ahead and use my camera raw filter inside of Photoshop to change the colors a little bit. So here you can see me like just playing around in general with my exposure, my contrast, my highlights, my shadows, all that kind of stuff, just to get something a little bit nicer out of this. And for the rest, the lighting is really not special. It's one directional light. And in your direction light, the only thing that you want to focus on is, of course, having an interesting angle and just having your light to be strong enough so that we get like this glare that you can see here. And here you can see me like playing out with the shadows, by the way. And then on your direction light, make sure that you have cascaded shadows, the distance up really, really high if you have big environments. So you just want to scroll down and then you have cascaded shadows and then you have the distance which is... which will basically increase the distance from which your shadows will be active. For your post effects, Unreal Engine 5 made the post effects really, really easy. You barely need to do anything. So I'm mostly just spending my time within the color grading effects where I switch between my shadows, global, and my color grading LUT, as you can see over here. And meanwhile, I'm also just placing some ivy. This is just like some extra. Now at this point we are really reaching the end of this tutorial, so now before we go into the very final stages of finishing off this tutorial, I first of all just want to quickly give you my thoughts on the laptop.
So overall I am super impressed by the laptop. Honestly, I had no idea that a laptop can be this powerful as someone who only uses desktop computers. I did have to get used to using the laptop, but luckily it can hold up to two 4K screens, which was really nice. So I just hooked up one of my desktop screens so that I can properly work, because of course those screens are a bit bigger. But for like all of the lighting and all of the polishing, I did use this screen, because this screen of course is much higher quality. So yeah, honestly I'm loving the laptop. It is really fast, it's really strong, it's not too heavy and it's also quite thin. And it just overall, it works great. Like it was a breeze, the setup, I didn't really have to do anything special. And knowing as someone who builds their own PCs, I always run into problems. So this was quite refreshing. I do wish that there were a few more USB ports. So right now it has one normal USB port and two USB-Cs. So I do wish that it had like a few more USB normal ports. Because right now, for example, I'm using multiple screens. So let's say that I have two screens hooked up, which means that we would have three screens. They use USB-C for those screens, which means that I would only have one USB left, which is a normal USB port. And for that one, I would be using my mouse. So I quite like that flexibility. I don't mind using like converters from USB-C to normal USB or something like that. But it would just be nice if I have a little bit more ports available for me. Now, next to that, if you are running really heavy programs like Unreal Engine 5, do expect that the front over here gets quite hot to the touch. It is basically up to you to choose if you want to either have slightly louder fans so that it doesn't get hot, or if you want to go ahead and just have like a silent PC and then that the font feels a bit hot. I personally, I don't really like the loudness, especially not when I'm recording. So that's why I just kept my fans low, even though it is quite hot. But the CPU is still ranging around 70C, which for a laptop I've been told is completely normal, especially for one of this size. Overall, I honestly have no complaints about the laptop. The way that I imagine this is that now, whenever I need to travel, I no longer need to worry about not being able to work for a long time, because I am quite busy often. So I can already like see myself just traveling for a few weeks, going somewhere nice, but then still being able to work in between. So I would say that I highly recommend this laptop. Now, it is a little bit pricey, so it might not be for everyone, but if you're an artist and you just want to have a general laptop for travel, or if you want to just have like a portable setup, which many people also want, then I do highly recommend this laptop, and I feel confident at this point that almost anything you throw at it, it can handle. It doesn't matter if it is game art, if it is video editing, Photoshop, sculpting, whatever. I'm pretty sure that it will pretty much handle anything. Also offline rendering, I feel confident that with an RTX 3080 Ti, it can easily handle that kind of stuff. So lastly, I want to once again thank MSI for sponsoring this video, and I hope that you all found this tutorial useful. So let's go ahead and finish off this tutorial.
Okay, so we are back again, and the lighting is starting to look really good. Now with our color grading, our environment has completely been transformed. Over here I'm still playing around a little bit more with like my bloom and everything, but just with like some basic lighting and some good color grading, you can see that just the entire environment gives a very different vibe, and it already starts to look a lot more professional, a lot more sci-fi. Now here for the ivy, the great thing about ivy is that you can add a really nice punch of color on assets that do not often have a lot of color. So over here we have like white and gray. And then it's just nice to all of a sudden have like a punch of green in there, sitting white on top of those colors. And for the rest, what I'm doing here is I'm just doing some final touches. Like I'm adding some extra rocks here and there just to see if it looks interesting in front of my camera, that kind of stuff. But yeah, and for my skylight, I'm using an HDRI map, just as I told you before, I believe. So the HDRI you can get from polyhaven.com, and it is really great to just get like some quick lighting in there. Now, at this point, I am just adding an extra area light. And this area light, sorry, I had like a little selection bug. That can happen. This area light is great to just add like some fake lighting in my tree, so that when I look in my camera, the tree doesn't look too dark. Because, of course, the sunlight comes from a different area. So that's mostly why I'm placing this light, just that it doesn't look too dark whenever I go into my camera angle, as you can see over here. But yeah, this is starting to look really great. Like we got something really interesting already, especially for such a quick way. Now over here I'm placing some planets. I already prepared these planets off camera. And I'm adding a second direction light. If you go in the second direction light and then scroll down to your settings and turn your light channels to number 2 instead of number 1, what you can do is you can control which assets use light channel number 2. You can see it as layers. All of my assets use light channel number 1, which is our normal directional light. And then the second direction light, I simply set to only use light channel 02. And then I click on my planets, and I also set my planets to use light channel 02. And at this point, I take some final screenshots, and then we are pretty much done with our environment. So let's go ahead and now go back to real time so that I can properly show you a few more things. Okay, so the last thing I want to show you is that over here you can see an environment that looks very much like the one that we created. I actually created this environment completely from scratch again, but this time I just really took my time with it. And this is of course not the one that we did during the recording, because you can only do so much within 3 videos, even as a time lapse, when you are recording something for YouTube. Here you can see what can happen when you really define an environment and you just spend time on placing every single tree properly, or almost every single tree, on placing every single roof asset very precisely, and also working a little bit more with the materials. And of course what you can also see is you can see that the composition is a little bit better. There's a lot more ivy going on, there's a lot more dirt going on because I added like some dirt decals and all that kind of stuff. So when you really take your time with it, you can create something really amazing. And it still didn't take too long. This probably took around double as much in terms of the time than our version. But of course I used a lot of cheats with our version to really get like something really quick. But basically, I hope that you really enjoyed this tutorial course, and I hope that you learned a lot from it. Just the main takeaways: always work from large to small. First of all, define your composition, then go over to the small details. Of course, I already had all of my models ready in place. It's nice to play around with your colors between gray, white, grab always like one color that's like a nice punch. In this case it is green, and then I also have like a background that has like quite a nice punch with our rocks, which are a bit yellowish. And for the rest I do a lot of storytelling. Now in this environment the storytelling was that it is on a planet, it has like a dome, so there's like oxygen in here, there is enough water and everything for all of the plants to grow, but then it just hasn't been maintained. So maybe this has been abandoned or something like that, which made all of the foliage nicely grow and just make its own little atmosphere. So yeah, I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial. Once again, my name is Emil Sneakers, and thanks for watching Fast Way Tutorials.